everyone, and welcome back to the CLSR. And I'm your host, the counselor. Just want to let you people know you can get a hold of me at TheCounselor That's the counselor at gmail.com. Now, I want to say to all my wonderful listeners out there, let's continue to spread the word like the wise old bird and put your money where your mouth is so we can handle this biz. Take care. Welcome back to the CLSR, and I'm your host, the counselor. And today we're going to be talking about part two in the George Floyd court case. And I have to tell you, it's been 1 week. That week has been heavy on our minds, heavy on our thoughts. Emotions have been pouring out, and I got to tell you, just from the opening statements, I can see that there are a lot of heavy hearts, a lot of guilt, anxiety, stress, frustration from some of the witnesses that have testified this week. I mean, you got to think about even George's sister when she's talking about how she doesn't even really want to see the video. And I could fully understand that. I wouldn't want to see it either. The whole world has to see it. I would want to see it. I don't even think I'd be in reality. I would just check out for a while because it's just unbelievable. You have a family member that's here and a family member that's gone. And we all know what that could be like, some of us for sure, more than others. But the point is that there were witnesses that were on the stand this week and they were breaking down. They were apologizing. Some of them couldn't sleep. You know, they knew that they were there and George was crying out and they felt helpless, that they couldn't do anything. And out of their great fear of probably being shot from the police or, being attacked or just breaking that norm, it's just, it has a grip over you. So a lot of the people that are testifying this week or who have testified this week are showing that they're hurting and they're going to be hurting for years to come. And it's no fault of their own. I mean, they have to realize that. That's one way they have to rationalize it. It's no fault of their own, although that's not easily said. Unless you're in that position, you're not going to know, you know, what you're doing. You're not going to know. You're going to freeze. You're going to hesitate and you're never going to think that it's going to end up that he's going to die right in front of you. Because if you knew that for sure, you would definitely jump in there. No one thinks it's going to happen until it happens. But it happened. And I was tearing up when I saw those people on the stand. It just brought me back. It almost brought me back like 400 years. Like, when you think about it, it was almost like slavery when you think of the history of the black people and their struggle. And then, it's almost identical to those feelings where you feel helpless. It's a different entity this time taking over, but it's a helpless, vulnerable feeling that every man, woman, and child, when they get this feeling, it tears your heart apart and it doesn't make sense to you. But you're in these compromising positions where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, but you gotta live with it. And my heart goes out to those people because it's not an easy thing. Nobody asked for this. No one wants it. But you have to try to deal with it. And my advice to those people, those witnesses, the ones that the Minneapolis firefighter, Hanson, who broke down in tears, testified how he felt so helpless and desperate while the police prevented, her from, doing what she had to do. You know what I mean? Preventing the loss of a life, giving medical attention. You know what I mean? That was something that, it was just heartbreaking when they knew that that's their job to save lives and they feel that they can't do it. You know, it's just, it got so heavy that there had to be recesses throughout this week. The judge just had to call it. You know what I mean? And when you think about, someone talking about, Williams, for example, when he's talking about, you know, the heavy breathing, the tremendously heavy breathing that he was witness to. You know what I mean? How he could hear him struggling to gasp for air. Like, just unbelievable. And it's just something that I don't think the world
unless you're dealing with this and you have to. I think the world got a glimpse, but just imagine you having to deal with that in your life on a regular. It's not something that a lot of you even could fathom. But just by him describing that, I had to turn the channel for a minute because I was so emotional. And I'm just, see, this is a time where you feel it doesn't matter how educated you are or how much strength you think you have or how much influence or friends or family or how well you're doing in your job and your career. Your fear, you know, is one thing that sometimes you just can't control that fear, you know, and it's not just fear, it's vulnerability and powerlessness, and it's when someone takes your power. And I know when someone takes your power, you obviously feel powerless, but there's no words that could explain. But I could tell you that these witnesses have broken it down and they have told us a story and they made us feel this story. It's almost like when you're sitting there watching it, you could picture yourself being on that sidewalk outside that restaurant watching this go down and you're just in disbelief. And see, when you even hear more of the testimonies, right? Like the 911 dispatcher that was saying something was wrong. That was like one of the first witnesses to take the stand, the 911 dispatcher. You know, they had a gut instinct that something was terribly wrong. You know what I mean? Something was not right. You know what I mean? And those feelings made people react, and it's such a harrowing feeling, right? It's just, you know, even the senior Minneapolis police officer, when he took the stand, the most senior officer in the department testified, you know, that they weren't trained to kneel on the neck of someone who's in handcuffs. This wasn't procedure. It's not what is expected to go down. It's not a part of the protocol. It was wrong. And it was not something that is, you know, accepted by the police force, no matter who. See, we can't think in absolutes. And that's what we got to be careful when it comes to the police force. See, we all get the picture of us against them, and it's not true because some police officers are family members. Okay, and we have to put it into perspective. And if we're really putting this into perspective, we're realizing and recognizing that in every workplace, we got our bad apples. And we don't want the bad apples to give all of society a bad name. And just like with police officers, not all police officers are bad apples. All right, there are some apples that are family members that are doing their job and they're doing the best that they can, but you got some bad apples out there. So we want to decipher between the bad apples and the good apples, but the point is I don't want the population out there to get the perspective that people are inherently bad. They're not. Although it may appear like that, they're not. And see, when you hear another police officer talking the truth about, hey, this is not what we do, this is not who we are, and this is not representative of the forces around the world. Unfortunately, when you get to us against them, there's a lot of people that focus on the big picture and go, let's brush them all with one paintbrush and categorize them as evil. Well, it's not the case. And we have to keep that into perspective. And it's not just because this officers testify. It's because you all know we all have police officers in our family somewhere. And if you don't, you got someone in a service department somewhere. And some of them are good and some of them are bad. It's unfortunate that George Floyd had to deal with this. But this has become prevalent throughout the police force. That's the problem. I think the problem is that it's become so prevalent in the police force, it's hard to weed out because there's laws backing a lot of foolish behavior. And there's a lot of change that needs to occur. Unfortunately, it's at the expense of a lot of black people. Not only black people, but it seems to be at the forefront here. And so when you are in those positions, to be real, we have to respect and appreciate that. However, we also need to be aware that there was some heavy testimony this week. And I mean, I'm hearing from George Floyd's girlfriend and how they had those substance abuse problems. And we could talk about that all day. But the truth be told is that there's a number of us that have problems out there, but it wouldn't lead to this result. And that's what we have to keep in mind. There are a number of people out there having challenges, but what we saw, and I think the world could concur, is that George Floyd was very respectful and he was abiding by the law and he was not confrontational. And my concern is that it could get skewed. Oh, yes, you know you're going to hear a lot of different opinions because that's what lawyers do. But the video speaks for itself. And are there other factors? There are other factors. But I'm going to come back to the video speaks for itself. So in this part too, I think that because we're here at the end of this week, we've seen a lot. There's a lot to process. And I think moving forward, it's going to be important that we identify some terminology that's going to inform our audience on what they're seeing and maybe why things are occurring the way they are. So let's talk about maybe when it comes to throwing out evidence and, judges making decisions or objections and sustains, and we need to know all this terminology to give ourselves some insight. But first and foremost, I have to say my heart goes out to all those family members who have been dealing with this, and it's a nightmare and it's going to continue to go on. But my heart goes out to all the people, not just George Floyd. See, this is a reminder of all the brothers and sisters out there that get to deal with this and I got it in my family too. I'm going to be real. My heart is just, I don't know, the bravery of some family members that have to deal with the loss of a child is not something you could put into words. And just how they wake up each day and put a smile on their face is beyond me, but they do it. I could give you a lot of reasons to do it, but they have to have their own reasons. One thing I know is that we don't want our children dying in vain. And so these are opportunities for us to help the families and support the families, but help ourselves by realizing we got to work on some change, some positive change. We got to work on some relations. We got to work on some collaboration. And we got to work on fixing the nation because it's broken. It's definitely broken. It's not the only one, but it's broken. It's broken. Terribly broken. And I failed to see the progress in the last 50 years. Real progress. I mean, we've made some real progress, but this here blocks all of what I've seen over the last 50 years. Because I'm like, where are we improving? Where as society, yes, we're making steps here, but we're also still falling back. So really, there's always going to be room for improvement, and we're going to keep working on it. We're not going to give up. We're going to keep on working on it, and that's the reason why they need to hold their heads up. And that's what we need to do. We need to do our part. We need to understand we got to create resources for our children in the school. And I've done that. I have a book out there, and I'm going to tell you, it's called Proven Black Student Achievement. And I want you to go on there and look, because I think it starts in the education system. We need to know as parents and family members how our children should be supported in the school system. What we in this book is a resource of resources. It teaches the teacher. So you as a parent know what you want for your children when they're educating. All right? You as a community member, you as a teacher, you as an administrator, need to read this book. Go on Amazon, go on Kindle, get the book. We need to support each other, but we need to educate each other. And we need to educate the public in general. So I'm saying that we need to be resourceful. And we can't. See, this is one thing I'm learning from this week's testimonials. We can't wait. If anything, this has taught us from all the testimonials, all the submissions. We can't wait for other people to take matters into their own hand. We got to be positive and productive, but we got to put our perspective into place. We can't wait for somebody to change the system. So I'm taking an initiative. I'm creating resources to help. Not just black people, diverse people, but black people that I see. We need it in the education system right from the ground up. I'm not talking about secondary. I'm talking elementary right from the get-go. So we need this resource. We need to start educating, not just educating. We need to get the mind right. We need to change the mindset. We need to take that fear and use it for the positive. We need to develop and increase our own footprint where we matter. And we can't do that waiting for someone else to do it. We have to develop our strength. We need to work together. See, the old saying of, and you know, a lot of people say that, well, the problem with the black community is that we don't work together. See, that statement has to be dismantled. Okay? Because that's the type of statement that goes through our community and keeps us apart. It's the negative fear inside us. It's the powerlessness that we have and we spread amongst each other that we don't need to do. Because we wouldn't be, think of the progress, not just progress, the moves we've made just in the last 100 years. That statement does not apply. Yes, we have lots of work to do, lots of work to do. Which culture doesn't? What ethnicity doesn't? We have lots of work to do. But let's stop applying that. We don't work together. We might compete with each other. We could collaborate more effectively for sure. Definitely. We need improvement in that area, but we need to dismantle that statement and start acting as one and start supporting each other as one and moving in the right direction as one. And it starts with action. And the action is positive action. Okay? Positive action. And there are a lot of people, see, not reaction, action. Positive action. Not reaction. When stuff happens, that's when we get upset and not. No. We need to be frontier people. We got to be actually in the frontier section of society, not the ladder, not the back of the bus. We need to take initiatives. We need to stop waiting for certain jobs and start creating certain jobs and opportunities. And there are a lot of movements going on, but we need to reinforce this. We need to value ourselves. We need to push for reparation. We know what happened. They know what happened. And I'm thanking goodness that that's going. But that's just a start. Because we have to acknowledge what we've been through. We need to, and I say we, because we have to be acknowledged not just by the rest of the world, but ourselves. We need to look at what was wrong and what continues to be wrong. But it has to start somewhere. So when we're talking about court terms, we're talking about identify propensity evidence. So when you hear this, you need to know this is evidence that you committed a crime on a prior occasion and cannot be used as evidence that you committed the crime the government has charged you with on this occasion, that previous occasion. Propensity evidence may, however, be used to prove motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, knowledge, identity, absence of mistake, or lack of accident. A classic example to prove modus operandi. That is, a criminal's unique way of committing a crime. If a defendant always spray painted a house after burglarizing it, then this evidence could be introduced to prove that the defendant committed the most recent burglary where the house was also spray painted. This evidence is admitted to show identity, not a propensity to commit burglary. And think about arguing the evidence is unfairly prejudicial. So, when you argue the evidence is unfairly prejudicial, this means the courts will exclude evidence if its probative value is substantially outweighed by its prejudicial effect. So, what do I mean by that? I mean, for example, you can exclude guilt by association evidence as unfairly prejudicial if the government tries to introduce evidence that you hang out with drug dealers to prove that you too are a drug dealer. Then you should move to have this evidence excluded as prejudicial. You see, like that's like when people say birds of a feather flock together. If you're with those people, then you must be one of them. That's not necessarily true, and the court has to acknowledge that. You don't need to be lumped in. You might have some bad friends. We all do. Sure, doctors, lawyers out there might have some unsavory characters, but they're still friends. But it doesn't mean at the end of the day the doctor's doing those things. It's just it might be an associate. You know what I mean? Might be somebody they grew up with. All right. But this is talking about the court. I'm not talking about the family experience where a family member said birds of a feather flock together, watch your friends. For sure, that could influence when you're younger. But when you're older, it doesn't necessarily apply because you are of that state of mind that you should know better. Right? So excluding evidence of your wealth or your amount of insurance cover. Courts have acknowledged that evidence of your wealth, including any insurance policy, will likely induce juries to decide a case on improper grounds, namely your ability to pay the plaintiff. Because you should be held liable only for what you did and not because of your wealth, you should move to exclude this evidence. So what does that really mean? You know what I mean? So basically, well, put this into perspective. See, let's say you're a defendant and you've been charged with assault. And maybe the jurors think that, you know what, you come from a wealthy family, you could have done it. However, you got a lot of money. This person who you assaulted didn't have really any money, but you're coming from a privileged family, which happens, believe me, more than you know. They come from a privileged family, they have some money, and see, the court doesn't want you as a juror to take that into consideration when it comes to making decisions regarding the defendant, if they're guilty or innocent. So they want to cut that out. So that evidence could be excluded if they find out that maybe decisions were made. Well, we thought, well, this person had the money. If there's any indication of that, usually that could be excluded. All right. And you also got to think that you could move to strike evidence that lacks a proper foundation. See, a document cannot be entered into evidence unless someone lays a foundation for it. This means that the person offering the evidence must produce testimony sufficient to prove that the item is what the party claims it is. For example, a person cannot just get up on the stand and argue that a photograph shows you hitting another car in an intersection. The witness must first establish that the photograph is actually of the intersection in which the accident occurred. How she knows that is the intersection, for example, she drives through it daily. And how she knows the day and time the photograph was taken, right, is the same. If a witness fails to make these connections, then she has failed to lay a proper foundation, and the evidence may be excluded by the court. The judge will ultimately determine whether the witness has provided sufficient evidence or some documents are self authenticating. For example, domestic records that are sealed and signed, certified copies of public records, newspapers, magazines, as well as acknowledged notarized documents do not require a foundation, right? That you could connect to it to bring it forward. See, and demand the use of original documents. Generally, a duplicate is admissible, but you can challenge its admissibility if you argue that it is not authentic or that only a partial duplicate of the original is being offered. Challenge the chain of custody. Like, if in a criminal trial the prosecution sent off the murder weapon to the lab to test for fingerprints, then the defendant should look through all the reports describing the movement of the weapon. If the defendant can find a time when the gun is not accounted for as being in police custody, then the chain of custody is broken. The defendant could move to have the evidence thrown out. See, this is what I'm talking about. Us educating on how evidence is administered and thrown out. Do you understand? Both ways. Do you understand? Because you might see something. Well, wait, why was that thrown out of the case? It doesn't make sense. Then you start getting your back up. Well, you need to know there's reasons why. And that's exactly why we're having this little information session, right? So if someone moved to strike any statements made during settlement negotiations, see, a move to strike any statements made during settlement negotiations, conduct and statements made during a compromise negotiation are not admissible at trial to prove your liability. Also, any offers to pay for medical expenses may not be used at trial to establish liability for an injury. Courts exclude this evidence because they want to encourage settlement negotiations. If you were worried that your offer of a settlement could be used against you in court, then you might never agree to settle. So they don't consider some of this. Claim attorney-client privilege. Remember this. There's a lot of people worry about this. Because the courts want to encourage people to seek legal advice, they prohibit the introduction of any statement made to an attorney for the purpose of seeking legal advice when the attorney is acting in a professional capacity. The attorney-client privilege can be waived and waived inadvertently. If you tell your attorney something in public and it is overheard, then the witness can testify to what you said. So remember, if you're talking out loud and you're talking, because some of you're out there sitting in those courtroom lobbies and you're trying to listen in, and the lawyers, honestly, the lawyers talking to their clients, they'll talk right in front of you. Now, whether you know what they're saying, but if it's related to your court case, you could go in there and say, hey, I heard all this stuff. You know what I mean? And they will look at that. A lot of you think, oh, that's client privilege. Not necessarily. If you overhear them in public having these conversations, they're divulging a lot. Well, maybe they shouldn't be doing that. Now, the claim for spousal privilege. To promote spousal harmony, courts will exempt spouses from being forced to testify against each other. Also, they will exclude statements made between spouses. See, the communications privilege allows you to throw out any statement you made to your spouse. Although your spouse may still testify about other matters like what he or she observed, they cannot testify as to what you told them. The testimonial privilege allows you to keep your spouse from testifying completely about any matter. In federal court, however, the testifying spouse holds the privilege. That is, if she wants to testify, then you cannot stop her. And that's the difference. See, how many of you really know the difference between state and federal, right? You know what I'm saying? There's state court, there's federal court, there's Supreme Court, all kinds of courts. So make sure you know the difference. No one rules apply. Like, if it was that simple and one rule applies in any instance, don't you think we wouldn't need as many lawyers? But because there's so many rules, and you all know this, there's so many different rules that need to be applied, and they do speak their own language. So they can, manipulate, they can maneuver, they can do all kinds of things because we're lay people, right? So remember this. No one rule applies. So if you think, oh, you can't do this, and then how many times have you had this happen? Whether you're going to small claims court or not, you end up going to small claims court. You thought you had a case, and then all of a sudden, it said that in the law. Oh, it said this, but then when you get there, it's twisted a little bit, and some other rules apply. It's almost like they don't really want to make a decision, and that's where a lot of people get upset because you're saying to yourself and shaking your head, why are the courts so challenged when it comes to making decisions? Why can't they just, it looks black and white here. But then something else is introduced. See, but when you're a lawyer and you speak that language, you're going to know all the tricks, the ups and downs, ins and outs. They all speak that language. That's why a lot of times you need a lawyer. So I tell a lot of you people out there, yes, the rare 1 in 1 billionth case, you don't use a lawyer. But the truth is, they speak a different language. So some of you who think you're jailhouse lawyers, that's only in the movies. I mean, and usually some of those people are jailhouse lawyers from the inside out. You understand? A lot of times the judge is telling you, listen, get some legal representation. And you're like, no, I can do it myself. Well, there are cases that you can do it yourself, but depending on the severity of the case, I strongly recommend you never try to do it yourself because the language is different, the laws are different. And believe me, even though many cases are based on precedent, which happened in the past, laws change and they get updated, right? So if you want to learn about it, believe it or not, there's a lot of information on your case that you could go online to find. There's databases on laws that apply. A lot of people don't do the work to figure it out. Sometimes it's right in front of you. But you figure you got to be a lawyer. But if you get a lawyer, it doesn't mean you don't have to do your work. Do you understand? If you have a case, you could look into what you got to deal with and see if there's other cases that relate to it and do your work. Do a little bit of work. See, when people talk about homework, that's why a lot of people don't know anything nowadays because they don't do no homework anymore. Whenever you got to deal with case, do a little bit of work. Don't just see. We're too busy passing our stress and our tests over to other people to get the job done. But one of the biggest things the government invests in is libraries, right? You could be in the hood up to no good, but the one thing you can count on is the government usually puts money into what? The libraries, right? They ain't thinking you're going to go in there and actually read. Most people jump in there and socialize. But the truth is, I know in this country, we got libraries that look like museums, like modern museums, because that's where the government put. Maybe they think if that's a place that we put some money in, maybe people will go. But they're right. But the truth is, most of us go for interests, our likes, or a topic that we're told to go and read upon from our school or our institution. But the truth is, if you get in trouble and you have some issues when it comes to court, there's certain things you could do as well to learn. Learn about your situation. Learn about your mental health, right? How it applies to court. You see, what a lot of people don't know is even over here, we have civil court, criminal court, and mental health court, right? So if you have a family member who has real mental health issues and concerns, you need to consider that. Which court do they belong in? You shouldn't be having them in just civil court or criminal court, rather. Civil meaning, just laws or disputes or between house owners and land rights and, lawsuits over somebody, who took a patent. That's civil. Criminal, you know what that is. And mental health is another thing. So you have to keep that in mind where you or your family member might be best served. Is it in a civil? Is it in a criminal? Or is it in a mental health court? Right? You got to decide, but you do have choices. And if you don't have choices, demand those choices. Because a lot of things happen out there. And the counselor can go all day about the mental health court. Because I know, I've worked in some of them. Trust me, I ain't lying. So I'm being real. I will only tell you what I know. Okay? So I'm telling you, been in there, worked in a big major city and going in and out of court and all that. I ain't going to get into all that business, but I'm telling you, I have some experience with that. And I know there are different divisions and for good reason. And if you have, family members who are real, see, a lot of people don't take mental health serious. I'm not going to get too heavy into this, but it leads to a lot of acts that, you know, um, just people making wrong decisions. Mental health. It's not an excuse. It's used sometimes as one, but 90% of the time, they're real issues, right? And sometimes we like to categorize it as, you know what, it's not important, mental health, but it really is. It does affect us, and a lot of us shake our heads because we're really about safety. We're not really about understanding mental health. So we're like, you could be as crazy as you want to be, but you need to be off the street. And that's true in many cases, right? We could go on. We're going to talk about that later. But, anyways, we've covered some good information today. And I could go on, and I'm going to go on because we got part 3. And this is where we need to be. And I need you, people, my listeners. I appreciate you. And I want you to be like the wise old bird. I want you to go allmylinks.com/the CLSR. I want you to pick up the book, Improve a Black Student Achievement. I want you to order. I want you to spread. I want you to read it. It's a simple read. It's very practical, but all of it is research. It isn't opinion. You get those books and people want to tell you what they think. This ain't no about that. When I lay it down, I lay it down right. It's researched. You'll see the references in it. You'll go and see, a lot of people will read a book and they don't even know there's a difference between research, resources, and the regular read. The regular read is for fun, nonfiction, research, information. You don't need to go to university to pick up a research resource. But a research resource is very important because it's almost like brainstorming. Like some people who have just, there's a value in education. If you don't got it, you could still get it. You don't need to be applying for certain programs. You could still educate. So when I'm talking about a research resource, that means people took a lot of time to go and find other opinions and facts and data, and they put it together. And if you're really committed to your cause, you put it together and lay it down. And this resource that I'm providing is something that's so valuable that I can't even. This is a resource. So all I'm gonna say is, when you do have a resource, don't take for granted how it's set up too. When you have resources and you have these people that put all this work into it, look at some of the references at the back and look at the books that they've read, and sometimes choose some of them and look them up and go through, and you'd be surprised how much education you can gain. Education is not a one-off. It's a commitment to continued learning. And as you can see in this world, we need to continue learning. So, take care of yourself, and we're going to go to part 2. Okay? Thank you. It's been an interesting week, and it's something that we all need to be sitting down, reflecting on, talking about. Play the podcast over. Okay? Sit down with your friends and your family, and process. But it's something that we need to do. And it's all about you. Not all about them or just us. It's all about you and what you can do. All right. Take care, people.